Take the shovel down off the wall and look at the blade in daylight. The steel is the color of a dried apricot, blotchy orange over brown, with darker patches where the water sat longest. Along the edge, there is a rough scale you can catch with a fingernail, and when you rub it with your thumb, it comes off as a fine rust-colored powder that stains your skin. Where the blade meets the handle there is a dark ring, and that ring is damp even now. The pruners are worse. The two blades no longer close cleanly. The spring is stiff. 11 years ago, that shovel arrived with a blade so smooth it slid into clay soil and came out clean, and the pruners closed with a sound like a pair of scissors. So you do one of three things. You take a wire wheel to it on the drill and grind until it shines. You spray it with the blue and yellow can from the shelf and hang it back up. Or you decide it has had a good run, and you buy a new one for $40. All three of those are wrong. It is not that you let it get too wet. Every steel tool in every garage in America gets wet. And it is not that they do not make them like they used to. There are shovels hanging in barns that are 90 years old with clean, bright steel on them. Those were not kept dry. They were kept treated, which is not the same thing. Rust is not dirt sitting on your steel. It is your steel. The iron itself has been converted into a different substance, and that substance is doing something to the metal underneath that a stain could never do. And the thing that keeps it spreading is not the wet weather. It is the rust that is already there. You can take a tool that looks unsalvageable back to clean bare steel for about $2. There is no grinding, no sanding, no wire wheel, and no metal is lost from the tool. Most of it happens overnight while you sleep. There is one strange requirement. Every couple of hours, you have to lift the tool out of the liquid and put it straight back in, and if you skip that step, the whole process slows down and stalls partway through. Here is what is actually happening in that steel. Iron wants to combine with oxygen. Left dry, it will do it very slowly and stop, because the thin oxide layer that forms seals the surface. Add water, and the reaction changes completely. Water lets iron and oxygen react freely and continuously, and what forms is hydrated iron oxide. That is rust. Now here is the part that matters, and that almost nobody knows. Rust takes up far more room than the steel it came from. The iron atoms in the oxide are spread out much further apart than they were in solid metal, so the layer that forms is several times thicker than the layer of steel it consumed. It has nowhere to expand except outward, so it swells, lifts, and flakes. Think about a crack in a concrete driveway. Water gets into the crack, freezes, expands, and widens it. Wider crack, more water, worse next winter. Rust does exactly that to your tool, without needing the cold. It forms, it expands, it pushes off the surface above it, and that exposes clean metal underneath to the air. Then it starts again on the fresh surface. That is why rust does not sit still like a stain does. It is a self-feeding process, and there is a second half to it. Rust is porous, like a sponge with microscopic holes running through it, and it pulls moisture out of humid air and holds it directly against the steel. So a rusted tool stays wet on the surface long after a clean one has dried. The rust is the reason the rust keeps going, which brings up the wire wheel. It does clear the orange. It also removes metal, because abrasion cannot tell the difference between oxide and steel, and it leaves the surface covered in thousands of tiny scratches. Rough steel has enormously more surface area exposed to air and holds far more water in its grooves than smooth steel does. So the tool you just polished starts rusting again within a day, and it does it faster than before. Many people find a light orange bloom on it by the next morning and assume the tool is simply too far gone. It is not. The tool was not ruined by the rust. It was ruined by the wheel that took the rust off and left the steel bare and rough enough to start over. If this is making sense of the shovel you have re-cleaned 4 times, subscribe now, because what comes next is what actually removes it, and there is nothing to grind. The first method is a soak in acid, and the acid costs $2 at the grocery store. Understand the mechanism first, because it explains everything about how to do it. Rust is a compound, not a coating. Mild acid dissolves iron oxide readily, breaking it apart and taking it into solution. It attacks bare steel too, but very much more slowly, So there is a wide window where the oxide is being stripped and the metal underneath is essentially untouched. This is the entire difference between chemistry and abrasion. A wire wheel removes whatever it touches. Acid removes what you want removed and works evenly across every surface, including the inside of every pit and the underside of every rivet, which is where the wheel could never reach anyway. Buy a gallon of plain distilled white vinegar. It is 5% acetic acid and it costs about $2. That is the whole shopping list. If you want it faster and with no smell, citric acid powder is the alternative, mixed at about a quarter cup per gallon of warm water, and it runs a few dollars more. Before anything goes in the liquid, wash the tool with hot water and dish soap and a stiff brush. Scrub off the caked dirt and every trace of old oil. This is the step people skip, and it is the single most common reason someone says vinegar did not work for them. Acid cannot dissolve rust, it cannot touch, and a film of old grease or dried linseed oil is a perfect shield. If the tool has been oiled at any point in its life, degrease it properly. Take the wooden handle off if it comes off easily. If it does not, that is fine, but plan to keep the wood out of the liquid. Now, find a plastic container that is deep and narrow rather than wide and shallow, because you want to submerge the tool using the least amount of vinegar possible. A tall plastic bucket, a cut-down laundry detergent jug, or for a long tool, a length of plastic gutter with the ends capped. Never use a metal container. Put the tool in and add vinegar until the steel is completely covered. Completely matters. If part of the blade sits above the surface, you get a hard line at the waterline where one side has been chemically stripped and the other has not, and that line will still be visible after everything is finished. Set it somewhere at room temperature. This is worth attention. Chemical reaction rates fall sharply as temperature drops. The same soak that finishes in 8 hours in a 70-degree kitchen can take most of 2 days in a 45-degree garage in November. Bring the bucket indoors. Now the part mentioned earlier. Every 2 or 3 hours, lift the tool out, let it drain for a few seconds, and put it straight back in. As the rust dissolves, it leaves behind a soft black layer on the surface, and that layer sits there and blocks fresh acid from reaching the oxide underneath. Lifting the tool disturbs it and lets the liquid get back to work. Without that, the reaction slows down badly after the first few hours, and you will wake up to a tool that is only half done. Check it at 6 hours. Light surface rust may already be finished. Heavy scale on an old shovel usually needs 12 to 24. Pull it out, wipe a section with a rag, and look at what is underneath. If it is gray metal, it is done. If it is still orange, put it back and check again in 3 hours. Do not leave it in for days on the assumption that longer is safer. Once the rust is gone, the acid begins working on the steel itself, and prolonged soaking etches the surface and can weaken hardened parts like pruner springs. 24 hours is the outer limit for anything, and most tools need far less. When you pull that shovel out, it will be black. Uniformly, dramatically black, and it will look like you have made things worse. You have not. That black is loose carbon and residue left behind as the iron dissolved out of the surface, and it is sitting there, not bonded. But it will not simply rinse off, and there is a bigger problem you cannot see. The steel underneath is now completely bare, freshly stripped, with acid still sitting in every pore and pit. Rinse it and stand it in the corner, and there will be orange on it before dinner. The second method takes 10 minutes, and it decides whether any of the first one holds. Mix baking soda into a bucket of water, about 2 tablespoons per quart, and stir until it dissolves. Drop the tool in and leave it for 10 minutes. That solution is alkaline, and it neutralizes the acid still trapped in the surface. Skipping this is why some people find their tool covered in rust the following morning despite having oiled it. They sealed active acid under the oil. While it is in there, scrub the black layer off with a stiff nylon brush or a nylon scouring pad. Not steel wool, not a wire brush. Nylon is hard enough to lift an unbonded deposit and too soft to scratch steel, and it cannot leave metal fragments behind in the pits. Work along the length of the blade. On pruners, work into the hinge and both faces of each blade. The black comes off as a gray sludge and clean metal appears underneath. Rinse with clean water. Now dry it, and do it immediately and completely. Freshly stripped steel that is wet will begin showing a light orange bloom within roughly 15 minutes. And that is not an exaggeration. Towel it first. Then take a hairdryer or a heat gun on low and go over the whole tool for 4 or 5 minutes until it is warm to the touch and there is no trace of moisture in any crevice, joint, or pit. Warm is what you want, and not only because of the water. Warm steel accepts what comes next far better than cold steel does. Because right now, you are holding the most vulnerable piece of metal in your entire garage, and it will not stay clean for 2 days on its own. The third method is a film of oil, and this is the point where something genuinely Japanese belongs in this video. A garden spade is not a Japanese object, and there is no traditional Japanese method for restoring one. But the problem of keeping bare carbon steel from rusting is one that Japanese craftsmen have dealt with for centuries, because Japanese kitchen knives, chisels, planes, and saws are traditionally made from high carbon steel that rusts easily and is not stainless. The traditional answer is tsubaki abura, camellia oil, pressed from the seeds of the camellia plant. It has been used to protect blades and tools in Japan for a very long time, and it is still sold for exactly that purpose today. There is a reason it works, and it is worth knowing, because it tells you what to look for if you use something else. Camellia oil is a non-drying oil. It does not oxidize and harden into a film over time, and it does not turn sticky or rancid quickly the way many cooking oils do. It stays as a thin liquid layer that sits in the surface of the steel and physically excludes water and air. That is the whole job. Rust needs iron, oxygen, and water together at the surface. Remove any one of them, and the reaction cannot proceed. An oil film removes two. Apply it while the tool is still warm from drying. Warm metal draws the oil into the microscopic pits and scratches instead of leaving it bridging over the top. A few drops on a clean cotton rag and wipe the entire steel surface, including the back, the edges, the shoulder where the blade meets the socket, and every part of a hinge. Then wipe it again with a second, dry cloth until the tool looks barely damp rather than wet. A heavy coat is not more protection. It collects dust and grit and turns into a grinding paste. If you would rather not buy camellia oil, plain mineral oil does the same job and costs very little. Motor oil works and is unpleasant to handle. Vegetable oil from the kitchen is the one to avoid, because most cooking oils will oxidize, go gummy, and eventually turn rancid on the tool. Boiled linseed oil is the other traditional option, and it behaves differently. It is a drying oil, which means it polymerizes into a hard protective film that lasts much longer than a wiped oil and is excellent for the wooden handle. On the steel, it works well too, but it needs a full day to cure, and there is a serious safety point attached to it that comes later in this video. All of this belongs to one larger system. If you want the complete Japanese method for keeping what you own working for decades instead of replacing it, the book is linked in the description, and it is there if you want it. The fourth method is the one that means you never do any of this again, and it takes 4 seconds per tool. Fill a 5-gallon bucket with coarse builder's sand, the sharp, gritty kind, not fine play sand. Pour in about a quart of mineral oil or clean motor oil and stir it through with a stick until the sand is evenly damp and holds together loosely when you squeeze it. Set the bucket by the door of the shed. When you come in from the garden, plunge the shovel, the trowel, the fork, or the hose straight down into the sand and pull it out 2 or 3 times. That is the entire routine. It does 3 separate jobs in one motion. The sharp sand scrapes the soil off the blade, which matters more than it sounds, because garden soil holds moisture against steel for days, and any fertilizer residue in it is salt-based and highly corrosive. The abrasion is mild enough that it polishes rather than scratches. And every grain carries oil, so the tool comes out with a thin, even film already applied across every surface, including the ones you would never bother to wipe. One bucket serves an entire garden shed. Top it up with a splash of oil twice a year. Where the tools then live matters almost as much. Rust needs water, so anything that lowers humidity around the steel slows it. Hang tools up rather than standing them on the floor, and especially not on a concrete floor, since concrete wicks ground moisture continuously and the air just above a garage slab stays damp. Get them off the ground and away from the walls. The Japanese word for this pattern of small, constant, unglamorous upkeep is kaizen, and it is the entire difference between a tool that lasts 3 years and one that outlives you. The fifth method is not a technique. It is a rule. A tool never goes away dirty, and it never goes away wet. Soil is not neutral. It holds water for days, and if you have used any fertilizer in that bed, what is clinging to the blade contains salts, which accelerate corrosion dramatically. That is the same reason cars rust out in states that salt the roads. Leaving mud on a blade overnight is not a small thing. It is a wet, salted compress held against bare steel for 12 hours, 30 seconds per tool. Knock the soil off, rinse it if it needs it, dry it, plunge it in the sand. And keep an eye on the handle joint, because the socket where wood meets, steel traps water and stays damp for days after the blade looks dry. That joint is where old tools fail. Before the part of this video that will save you the most money, if you have not subscribed, this is the moment. Now, the things that do not work, and the exact reason each one fails. The wire wheel on a drill or an angle grinder. It looks the most professional, and it does the most damage. It removes steel along with the oxide, which on a sharpened edge or a thin pruner blade is metal you cannot get back. It leaves a rough surface that flash rusts faster than the tool did before you started. And it cannot reach into the bottom of pits, so it grinds the tops off the rust and leaves the roots of it sitting in every hollow, ready to spread outward again. There is a physical hazard as well, since wire wheels shed individual wires at high speed, and those wires embed in skin and eyes. Full face protection is not optional if you use one. Sandpaper and steel wool. The same problem in slower motion. You remove metal, you leave a scratched surface with more area exposed to air, and you never reach the base of the pitting. On a pitted shovel, you can sand for an hour and still be looking at orange dots. Water-displacing spray is a rust remover or a long-term protectant. It is neither. The product is largely a light solvent with a small amount of oil in it, and it works exactly as designed, which is to drive water out of a joint and free something that is stuck. It will not dissolve an oxide layer. And the carrier evaporates, leaving a film so thin that in a damp shed it is effectively gone within a few weeks. Using it as your rust protection is why the tool you sprayed in April is orange again in June. Cola. The phosphoric acid in soft drinks is real, and it is genuinely a rust remover in industrial concentrations. In a can of soda, it is heavily diluted and accompanied by a great deal of sugar. It works far slower than vinegar, costs more, and leaves behind a sticky residue that then attracts and holds moisture against the metal. It is vinegar with a handicap, painting over rust. This one actively destroys tools, and it is extremely common. Paint is not airtight, and it does not stop the reaction underneath it. The rust continues, and because it expands as it forms, it pushes the paint off from below in blisters. Meanwhile, you have sealed existing moisture in against the steel and made it impossible to see what is happening. A painted tool with rust under it is in worse condition than a bare, rusty one because it hides its own decline. The lemon juice and salt scrub. Weak citric acid combined with an abrasive, which sounds sensible. The problem is the salt. Chloride is one of the most aggressive accelerators of steel corrosion there is, and unless every last trace is rinsed out of every pit, what you have done is pack the most corrosive material in your kitchen into the exact places where water collects. If you use it, the rinse has to be obsessive, and leaving it in the vinegar for a week because you are busy. Once the oxide is gone, the acid moves on to the steel. You get an etched, dull, microscopically roughened surface, and on hardened components, such as pruner springs and locking pins, extended acid exposure can make the steel more brittle. Time is not a free variable in this method. Check the tool. So what should you buy, both for this job and when a tool finally has to be replaced? For the soak, plain distilled white vinegar is the cheapest option, and it is entirely sufficient. Citric acid powder is worth the extra few dollars if you are doing several tools because it works faster, has almost no odor, and can be mixed stronger or weaker as needed. Do not buy a branded rust remover gel for a shovel. Most of them are the same acids at a considerable markup. For tools themselves, the honest answer runs against what most people assume. Stainless steel garden tools resist rust, but the alloys used are generally softer. The blades tend to be thinner, and a stainless spade will flex and bend in heavy clay where a forged carbon steel one will not. Carbon steel rusts and is stronger, holds an edge better, and can be sharpened for decades. Given that you now know how to stop the rust in 30 seconds a day, carbon steel is the better buy for anything that digs or cuts. Look at how the blade joins the handle. A solid socket, where the steel wraps into a continuous cone around the wood, is the strongest construction and the least likely to trap water in a seam. A tang and ferrule is acceptable. 2 stamped straps riveted to a handle is the weakest and the first thing to fail. Choose ash or hickory for the handle and avoid painted or varnished handles, since paint hides the grain and hides the cracks. And here is the purchasing rule worth acting on. Buy old tools. A rusted forged shovel from an estate sale for $8 is very often made of better steel than a new one at 4 times the price. And rust is now the least important thing on your list of concerns. You know what to do with it. Now the honest limits. This removes rust. It does not replace steel that the rust already consumed. Deep pitting is missing metal, and after the soak, those pits will still be there as dark dimples in an otherwise clean surface. The tool will be sound and will not spread further, but it will not look new. If a tool has rusted through, or a fork tine has gone thin and flexible, no chemical process brings that back. Acid does not sharpen. An edge that was dull or chipped before will be a clean, dull edge afterward, and it still needs a file or a stone. Do not soak chrome-plated or nickel-plated tools, which includes many older pruners and wrenches. Acid reaches the steel through any break in the plating, attacks it from underneath, and lifts the plating off in sheets. And keep wooden handles out of the liquid. Long submersion swells the wood, loosens the joint, and raises the grain. The safety part is short, and one item on it is not negotiable. Never mix vinegar or any acid with bleach or with any product containing bleach. That combination releases chlorine gas, and it is genuinely dangerous. Work with vinegar in a ventilated space, wear eye protection and gloves, and use plastic containers only. If you use boiled linseed oil, understand that rags soaked in it generate heat as the oil cures and have caused house fires. A crumpled linseed rag left in a trash can is a real ignition risk. Lay used rags out flat and separated until they are completely dry, or put them in a sealed metal can with water. Wear gloves for the whole process. Freshly stripped steel edges are sharper than the rust made them look. So, the whole sequence. Degrease the tool, then submerge it completely in white vinegar at room temperature for 6 to 24 hours, lifting it out every few hours so the acid keeps reaching the metal. Neutralize it in baking soda and water for 10 minutes and scrub the black layer off with nylon. Dry it immediately and completely with heat, then wipe a thin film of camellia or mineral oil onto the warm steel. Keep a bucket of oiled sand by the shed door and plunge every tool into it after every use. And never put a tool away dirty or wet. The same thinking, applied to everything else you own, is in the book linked below. What you are left with is not a tool that looks better. It is a tool that has stopped losing itself, which is what rust was actually doing. Now look at the handle on that shovel instead of the blade. Gray, dry, fibers standing up, and it gives you a splinter every spring. The standard advice is to sand it and coat it in polyurethane varnish, and that is a mistake, because a hard film on a tool handle cracks under flexing, water gets in through the cracks, and the wood then rots underneath a shiny surface that looks perfectly fine. The Japanese approach to wood does the opposite. It puts something into the fibers instead of over them. It takes about 10 minutes, and the handle ends up smoother than the day it was made. That is the next video. See you in the next one.